Hey, thanks for coming back to the Old Goat Garage, assuming that you saw my first video. This is my second. Did the first one about 10 minutes ago. Baptism by fire, man. Got a text right after I got done recording that first little intro to the Old Goat Garage, the Institute of Lower Learning, the place where we don't have all the answers, but I surely made most, if not all, the mistakes. Got a text about the topic of marriage, and so I'm jumping right back in, even before I've had my accountability partners look at the first video, and I'm responding to my friend M. That's as far as I'm gonna go with M's name. M has got an incredible question, and really it boils down to this. I'm going to paraphrase for M. What's the difference between marriage and living together? Well, a lot of times, to be frank about it, nothing. And why is that the case? Well, because first of all, the church, and I'm talking about the church on the grand scale, has done a terrible job of representing something that is vital to virtually every human being. I mean, most human beings at some point, they leave that primary dependent relationship they have with their parents, where they start out with no responsibility, not much, if anything, in the way of privileges. And over the course of 18 or so years, they grow to the place where not only can they accept and handle some privileges, but hopefully, and unfortunately in our culture, these two things don't always track together, but hopefully they can also handle some responsibility. And because they've come to the place where they can handle that responsibility and they kind of can manage themselves to some extent, they're now at some level qualified, prepared perhaps, you could say, to leave that primary dependent relationship of parent and child and enter into a relationship that is primary and interdependent. I would say, if nothing else, marriage qualifies as that. It's not a business relationship. It's not a contract. It's a covenant. Now, what's the difference between a covenant and a contract? Well, a contract is established by two people to set up kind of the guardrails, the limits, the fences of acceptable behavior. And it tells you, well, you can do this, but you can't do that and be acceptable here. Where a covenant is a declaration that you have made everything you have available to the success of a relationship. Now, does that mean that you set yourself up to be taken advantage of? Possibly, but not if you do it right. See, being willing to give everything doesn't mean you're going to give everything. It doesn't even mean it's good to give everything. Let me jump ahead a little bit and share a thought that I wrestle with and think about a lot. You know, the word love in our culture's got dozens of meanings. Sometimes it depends on the context. Sometimes it depends on the person who's using the word. In fact, sometimes the word love is pretty perverse in our culture. But here's a real workable definition. It's not, there's a word out there for it somewhere. I can't think of it. It's not comprehensive. But a real good working definition of the word love is ready, willing, and able, RWA. And when I tell somebody I love them, in my mind and in my heart, part of what I'm saying is I'm ready and willing to be and able to be what you need me to be. Not necessarily what you want, not necessarily what I want, but what I discern that you need me to be. And a covenant means that I am ready, willing, and able to be what you need me to be, and I'm going to be that as long as I can, hopefully till death doeth part. Sometimes that doesn't work out. Well, there's lots of reasons, tangible, practical reasons why that doesn't work out, but really what it comes down to is somebody corrupts the covenant. In fact, and this is my own personal theory, there's a word out there, it doesn't get used a whole lot anymore, and I think even when it is used, a lot of times it's misunderstood. And that word is adultery. It comes with a load of bricks, man. I understand that. But listen, because I want to set you free from the load of bricks. What does that word really mean? Well, kind of the standard acceptable religious definition is it's sexual activity between two people who are married but not to each other, or at least one of the parties is married. I think in reality, if you take the word adultery apart, you'll have a clear understanding of what it is and why it's so painful and why God tells us to avoid it if we can. Here's what it means. The prefix add means to add something to something else. The root word ult is the same root as in the word ulterior. It means other. And so technically, concretely, concisely, the word adultery means to add other. And what it means is it adds something other to a covenant that is made by two people. Now, there's another little secret that we'll add to that later. But at any rate, we recognize that when somebody adds something to that marriage union, that it's destructive. It's disruptive. And typically, it's a wound that leaves a scar at best, and a lot of times it's a wound that sunders apart a covenant, a relationship, a hope, an expectation. It renders and tears apart something that was intended to be safe, solid, dependable, reassuring, there when all else fails. And so, while we don't think much about it, most people have come to the place where they have no expectation of that kind of relationship. They have no expectation of that kind of covenant. And so the whole question of marriage versus living together, what's the big diff? Well, here's the diff. Marriage was not your idea. You may be married, and you may think it was your idea. If you're in a good marriage, I can assure you it was not your idea. See, way back in the garden, God made a man, and then he made a woman. But he used a completely different process. He made a woman who was a modification of the very DNA of the man. She was taken out of man. And part of what that illustrates is that two shall become one flesh. How intimate is that? How powerful is that? What an incredibly unique bond that is. When God ordains two people to be together, and you know why he did it? Because he made them for one another. He made me for my wife. He made my wife for me. And part of the reason why we've had our ups and downs, especially early on in our marriage, part of the reason the marriage is stuck is even before we committed to marriage, even before we explored sexuality, we were convinced that he had made us for one another. So in reality, this union of two is not a union of two. It's a union of three. There's a passage in the book of Ecclesiastes, I believe it's chapter 4, where it talks about if one is alone, how can they be warm? If one falls down, how will they stand up? And then it goes on and mentions a couple other analogies and illustrations. Then it says two have a good reward for their labor. And I think it's in the same verse, and it says, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Oh, wait a minute, we're talking about two, now we're talking about three. What's the third cord? You know, good ropes in the old days were made with 3 cords. Some ropes are still made that way. So at any rate, what's the third cord? Well, the third cord is the God who made two people for one another. Now, is it possible for two people to live together and not be married? Yes. Can they be possibly happy even? Yes. Are they limiting the full potential of their relationship? Yes. Two people to live together in harmony need grace. Here's an interesting tidbit of human reality. Because marriage is God's institution, it's not society's. It has a social component. It's not my idea. It's not your idea. It's God's idea. And because it's his idea, even people who don't believe in him can enjoy some of the blessings that he places, the grace, you might say, the gifts the gifting that he puts on the institution of marriage. And two people who aren't married but are living together can enjoy some of that, but they're missing out on the assurance that comes from knowing that God has ordained this union. So anyway, in practical terms, we can say that marriage really is a social institution. That's the reason why we file a license at the courthouse. We're declaring to the world, and it's a public record, that we believe that God has put us with this other person. Now, one of my favorite singers of all time was Glenn Campbell, and he has a line in one of his songs about he's not constrained by dried ink upon some line. Well, a marriage is much, much more than a filing at the courthouse. But it does have that component. And societies that are lacking in a sense of value towards marriage suffer terribly. The parts of our culture, our society, where marriage is not held in high esteem, where people come and go, and unfortunately, when there's not a marriage commitment, the coming and going is statistically a higher reality and a higher probability. But where that's lacking, there's uncertainty. Now, is it possible that someone would marry the person that God made for them and still find themselves in divorce court someday? Yes, that's possible. Because there are no perfect spouses. And we're not perfect spouses, therefore. And so we can do damage that is so profound that reconciliation and restoration, which are always a process, forgiveness can be and should be instantaneous. But restoration and reconciliation are the process of rebuilding broken trust. A lot of times when people have experienced that kind of betrayal, adultery, emotional divorce, that happens a long time, usually before people wind up in a divorce court. When they've experienced that kind of wound, they're uncertain about whether or not to even pursue marriage. What I would challenge people that find themselves in that position to do is ask God to show you if he's made a mate for you. I really believe some people enter into marriage prematurely, unwisely, without God's leadership, and therefore they're not able to make the marriage work. I believe that sometimes in a second marriage, I've seen grace where people who kind of learn their mistakes and who don't just jump in, because we're all relational beings, we're all sexual beings, and we want to find a safe place to express that, experience that, explore that. I think I've seen people who, having learned maybe a disruption in the order of priority in their first marriage, learn not to make those same mistakes in a second marriage. So, the way I see things, and again, I don't have all the answers, and I like to tell people I'm glad there's only 10 commandments, because if there are 12, I'd have broken all 12 of them. As it is, I've only broken 10. Now, some of them I haven't killed anybody. But in my heart of hearts, I've made every mistake that the 10 Commandments warns us against. And I certainly, while I've remained faithful to my wife physically, there have been times that I've neglected her. I've been doing my own thing. I've been out trying to make a living, and that was my excuse for not engaging and meeting her needs. And God forbid something happened to my Lainey. If I ever get married again, I'll be a better husband. I'm a better husband now than I was, but I got a ways to go. But some of what I've experienced myself and some of what I've seen in the lives of friends and loved ones would equip me to pursue marriage again. Because I would want to, I don't know if I can replace this relationship I got now, but I'd want something close to it. And I'd take a swing at the ball if God gave me that opportunity, but I would move carefully. Because I sure wouldn't want to just jump in, because physical needs, emotional needs, kind of a real good formula for finding a mate is this. Instead of pursuing people physically, emotionally, and then spiritually. Start out pursuing them spiritually, emotionally, and then physically if God ordains. And what does it mean to pursue somebody spiritually? It means to make the quality of the relationship priority one. What do you bring to that person that makes them a better person? What do they bring to you? And do they, especially in this realm, help you have a closer walk with your God? Because you know what? He's the only reliable father we'll ever have. My second most favorite verse in the whole Bible is Psalm 27:10, which says this: when my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will take me up. You know, when your spouse drops the ball and hurts your feelings, wounds you, whether that's writ large or in some small way, it's really important to know that God's got your back. He's not surprised. His grace is sufficient for what you're going through. That means He's able to hold you up. You know, there's an old saying that says, God won't put more on you than you can handle. Yes, He will, but He won't put more on you than He can handle as you walk hand in hand, trusting Him, relying on Him, going back to Him as the ultimate source for everything you need and want in life. But that's especially important when it comes to the question of, should I marry? I will tell you a short story, or as short as I can make it. I'm terrible at short stories. They all become long. But there's a young couple that I'm aware of that lived together for a period of time. And I think they would tell you, and I'm going to paraphrase what they've told me, but I think they would tell you that a lot of what brought them together was being able to commiserate about their pain, because both of them had a lot of pain in their upbringing. And they've known each other a long time. And they're in their early 20s. And while they were living together, God kind of got a hold of their hearts. And I'm not really sure what was the initial trigger for that. But in that state where they were hungry for God's blessing and God's direction, they got to where they were feeling a little guilty about living together. And they were really in a hurry, not to get married, but they were in a hurry to seek God's leadership and will. And I surmise, based on what they told me, that there was even a short period, well, I don't know, it might have been longer than a short period of time, where they withheld some of the sexual favors that they had indulged in because they really wanted to seek God. And that's pretty good biblical advice. I think it's 1 Corinthians chapter 7 where it says, husbands, don't defraud your wives physically, and wives, don't defraud your husbands physically. In other words, don't withhold sexuality from one another unless it be for a season that you may give yourself to prayer. In other words, if there's a time when there's a spiritual need in your life, a spiritual deficit, something you're wrestling with that's such a big issue that you've just got to spend some time with God, intense time, then it's okay to withhold. But at any rate, in this instance, the conclusion that they came to was they wanted God in the middle of their marriage. They wanted God in the middle of their relationship. And it's such a joy to see them growing and growing like weeds. Does that always happen when people who have lived together decide to get married? No, as a matter of fact, statistically, people who have been married or who have lived together first and then get married, their rate of divorce is higher than the population at large. That doesn't mean you avoid getting married. That just means you ask God to rearrange your priorities, rearrange your thinking, rearrange the direction of your life so that you can go into a marriage with hope. Maybe more hope than you had the first time. Maybe the first time you got married is just, well, this is what you do. You know, we like each other, and, you know, she's cute and he's studly, and, you know, maybe you got more perspective now. And maybe that perspective makes you cautious about even considering marriage. I would urge you to take that to God. He's big. I like to say you can understand life in 3 easy lessons. The first lesson is life is cruel. Not always, but it can be devastatingly cruel. That's life lesson number 1. Life lesson number 2, God is bigger than life. Jesus is Lord, and He's Lord over everything, including the broken circumstances of my reality. He can make sense out of it. He can do something with the chaos that I could never do. The third one is Life lesson number 3, and a lot of people, never get here. The sooner you and Jesus talk about life lesson number 2, and you'll probably get into some of the life lesson number 1. Complain to him. He can handle it. He knew. He let it into your life, but he didn't let it into your life to destroy you. Let it into your life to use it. And I would say my own little claim to fame is this. I believe for a very long time that the chaos and the difficulty and the trauma that I experienced and that I caused as a young person is now the foundation of my qualification to maybe, every once in a while, be an encouragement to somebody else. So, consider that. Jesus knows where you've been. He knows your hurts. And you may have trepidation about jumping in so deep. I would say don't jump fast. But if he says jump in with both feet, ask him for his timing. I'm going to throw in one more little thing and then I'm going to wrap this up. Ecclesiastes 8:5 says and the second part of that verse says, the wise man's heart discerneth both time and judgment. In other words, to every important thing in life, there are 2 components. There's what to do and when to do it. The next verse says, because to everything there's time and judgment, great is the misery of man upon him. Hey, sometimes we think, I know exactly what to do, and it's the wrong time. And if we press forward apart from God's timing, we might be inviting a little bit of disaster, a little bit of frustration, a little bit of dysfunction. On the other hand, sometimes it's time, but we don't know what to do. And that's the reason, because of that dilemma that Ecclesiastes 8:6 presents, that's the reason we need to walk intimately with God, trusting him as our Father, trusting him as our teacher, our guide, our ultimate resource for everything. Now that's something that only takes one lifetime to perfect. I'm not there yet. But at any rate, on the question of marriage versus living together, can you ever be happy? Yeah, you can have a measure of happiness. I've known couples who lived years without being married. But they've eliminated part of the glue, part of the structure, part of the reinforcement for the relationship that makes it workable, that optimizes it, makes it bloom and blossom. And yes, that takes a long time sometimes. But you want God in the middle of your relationship, just like you need God in the middle of your life. That's priority 1. That's the reason that I didn't follow through with some of the self-destructive lifestyle choices I made as a young person. Because I came to realize that I was destroying myself, and hey, maybe God's got a better plan than I've got. The reality is, I'm a pretty crappy God, but I keep trying occasionally. I bid you ask God for his direction, but don't be afraid of where he leads you. Yes, he's going to lead you to some scary places. Read the Bible, especially the Old Testament. You'll see people got led to some scary places. But God never abandoned his people, and he's not going to abandon you if you call on him. Hey, man, wish you well. Hey, woman, wish you well.